Good afternoon, everyone. I hope your Save Against Fear is going well. I am Barak Blackburn. This is my partner in design, Ellie Hillis, and we design little games, and we're avid gamers and fans of the genre and everything like that. Our website is zine.games, and here's some of the games we made. Some various things for we've done some stuff for Spectrum Publishing as well as we've done our own stuff. We'll be running games tonight and tomorrow over at the convention center, so feel free to stop by if you want to see some of the stuff that we have. We hope that you are doing well here and having fun with your panels. We hope to have a fun time with you. We're here to talk about the difference between role, R-O-L-E, and roll, R-O-L-L, playing, and sort of,
It keeps doing that.
keeps blinking out. Okay, it's good. I'm just gonna power on and keep moving. There's nothing that intense in the slideshow we have, so you know it's not
just
like
visuals.
It's just visuals, so it's not one of these like you have to read everything that's there. So who we are? I'm Barak Blackburn. I'm a librarian and teacher at the McDuffie School in Western Massachusetts.
I'm Ellie Hillis. I am currently working in television in research for market development, but I have previously been the vice president of Adidas Incorporated, which was a health and human services company, so I worked directly hands-on with individuals who were neuroatypical in both home services, career services, and day programs.
And Ellie also wrote her final sort of paper for college on superheroes, and I'm currently writing a paper on vinyl for my graduate work, believe it or not. But that's neither here nor there. We're here to talk about role-playing games. So I realize the text is kind of small. I figure we're going to start with 5 core ideas that a bunch of this stuff is going to jump off of. So the first is, I believe I can fly. The second is a quote from a David Mamet movie called Heist, which is, I tried to imagine a fella smarter than myself, and then I tried to think, what would he do? The third is, what game are you playing? The fourth is the X card and safety tools, and the fifth is the GM and player relationship. And so with these ground rules sort of set in place, or expectations, we can move on to our other stuff. So, I believe I can fly. I use this awesome picture of Super Grover, because Super Grover became a superhero because he said, I'm going to fly. You know, and so that's, I think, what we all want to be able to do when we're kids. It would be great to just be able to say, I believe I can fly. But I will ask this question: how many people here can cast Magic Missile? You can? Okay. All right.
I like to pretend.
All right. Well, we can pretend, but that's what role-playing games are. They're all about pretend.
Yeah.
So one of the core ideas we're going to keep coming back to is this idea of player versus character. And a lot of GMs and a lot of people get into this trap, and I can't say that I haven't been guilty of it in the past. I try to do better now, of sort of giving the players challenges, but not necessarily their characters, or giving the characters challenges, but expecting the players to figure it out. So we don't ask a player who can fly how they fly. We shouldn't necessarily ask a player who's playing a fighter how they fight.
But to extrapolate further, then a character who's really good at charisma, do we want to necessarily ask them how do they, romance an NPC? Yeah,
and we will talk about that. And the other thing, and I know there's not a lot of people here, more people may trickle in, you may trickle out. If you want to leave, if this is not for you, I won't be insulted. So that's one of the safety tools that you can use at a table, which is the sort of open door policy, which is if you're not having fun, it's fine. I won't be offended. But also, if you have questions, just chime up, raise your hand, shout it out. There's not a lot of people here. Let's have a discussion as well. So this idea of a character being able to do something that the player can't do. So we're gonna keep that in mind. Second part of this is a quote from the movie Heist, which is, I tried to imagine a fella smarter than myself, then I tried to think, what would he do? So in terms of role-playing games, I might play a smart character. But that doesn't mean I'm a smart player. Right? Simple idea. But why can't I play a smart character? I can play a strong character. We don't question that. But we do expect our smart characters to have smart players behind them. So I think that's wrong. So we have this sort of famous scene. We probably all recognize it from some sort of media or something or other, right? What do we have here from Lord of the Rings? The door. It's got little runes at the top. So if you were the GM and you gave this to your players, A lot of times GMs will give a riddle or something to their players and expect the players to figure it out. Well, the player might not be smart, but the character can be smart. So maybe help the players along the way.
And it may be something where you do have players who are interested and engaged by riddles, but if they hit a stumbling block,
Yeah.
they've had a bad day, there are ways to work around that by utilizing physical dice rolls.
Yeah, and you can, and if your game doesn't do that well, and we'll talk about that some, maybe consider other games that sort of do something, or think about doing something different. I don't want to, you present someone with a riddle, be like, okay, you're the smart person, make a roll. They're like, I rolled a 19. You're like, okay, here's the riddle. Great. Well, why did we have that in there at all? You want to have a little flavor. Ellie's a player of mine. Ellie likes mysteries. Ellie's not good at mysteries, but her characters might be good at mysteries, so it's that sort of disconnect there. So let's talk about some specific games real quick, and I don't mean games, I mean genres, and this is just sort of to set the expectations, but sort of so we know what we're playing here. So if our genre is fantasy and someone says that they want to play an elf, well, we've got some elves there. We've got your sort of rough, woody type elves that sort of do stuff. Oh.
What happened?
We
Lost image. It's just blue screen. Windows blue screen.
Like Windows actually blue screen?
Well, not the Windows blue screen, like the Windows logo.
Oh.
Dun dun dun. Oh, wait.
It needed to get wiggle.
There we go. Okay.
You'll have to move that back.
Yeah.
No, this
Why
screen.
not? But it's not getting anything right now.
Oh, now it's on the screen.
I'll restart it first, because
Oh,
that's awesome.
hey, thanks company for pushing out updates to my computer.
Right in the middle of using it?
Right in the middle of using it. So was this? Oh, come on.
Dun dun dun. That's it. That's where we want to be.
All right. Cool. Slideshow. Wait, that's not where we want to be though.
Oh, here we
Yeah, you want to do presenter mode. All right.
Presenter.
Hey, we're good. We should
And
be.
let me
Drag
drag
it
this
over.
over. There we go. We'll resize.
F11. No, you gotta here.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay.
Good enough. Good enough.
All right, so there we've got a nice rough woody elf, right? So someone says they want to play an elf, and we assume, okay, that's the one type of thing they want to play. Well, what if they want to play your more sort of pretty sophisticated elf? So that's another type of elf, right? What about that guy? What if someone wants to play that type of elf? Or there's that type of elf, right? And then there's the ElfQuest elf. So, Ellie, you met the ElfQuest people, right?
I did, yeah.
At their comic store you used to work at. So, when we ask ourselves what game are we playing, we all need to be on the same page. So we all need to identify what an elf is and what we're about. So, let's move on here. We're playing a superhero game, maybe? What are you doing, Ellie?
It needs to get full screen.
You got it?
No, it's not working. Whatever.
No, it's not working.
Go ahead.
No. Wait. Oh, no. Sign into Okta. What's going on here?
Okay.
Again, company update.
No, it's all good.
There's that. All right.
Okay, it's all good. I think it's all good. Let's click this. There we go. Let's go superheroes. So we got Batman, right? So that's one type of superhero. That's what we'll call it, like your gritty type of superhero, right?
No, but I want to play Batman.
Yeah, you want to play the movie Batman, right? That one, the guy with the nipples.
No, the other Batman.
That Batman, right?
Well, there's another one, but yeah.
There we go. So again, what Batman are you playing? We can do this again with Buffy the Vampire Slayer. This one's a little more interesting because you can say you're going to play a Buffy type game. So we've got our Buffy cast here. Great cast, terrible creator. But is it about growing up? So if I wanted to play a Buffy game, it's about growing up, so
Yeah.
being a teenager.
Yeah.
But some people are going to think the game should be about,
Vampire slaying.
killing undead things. So you need to be clear with your players about the expectations of what it's going to be and make sure they understand. Because when you play the game and you run it, you're running the game, and I may run the game and think the game's about growing up. Ellie wants to just kill vampires, so we're going to
And you can do both, but
You
it's
can.
all about picking the right systems and having your players at the table understand that everyone wants the same thing, right?
Yeah, and so that's a conversation to have beforehand with what you're doing and sort of talk to people.
Well, and that's an important thing is you want to have an open dialogue with your players, which is a lot of where the safety tools come in.
Yes. So the most classic safety tool is an X card. Does everyone know about safety tools in role-playing games? So we all know about the X card, right? So some X card situations that I've come across. I mean, there's other tools, and there could be a whole hour-and-a-half panel about safety cards. But I'm going to use the X card and just hit some notes real quick. So I played in a game once. It was a Monster Hearts game. Monster Hearts, like, sex is a big thing. And one of the players was like, you know, as we were sort of talking about the game and starting out, said, can we take rape off the table? And we were all like, yeah, sure, that's fine. Okay. I've played in games where people are like, can we take violence against animals and children off the table? And the GM was like, sure, yeah, that's fine. So they didn't have anything planned there. Mind control. Okay, that's a weird one, except I played in a game where literally like the superheroes were doing evil things. And when I suggested it might be mind control, I got X-carded for that. And I'm like, I'm not the one who made this scenario. So be careful with what you sort of are including in your game with X-cards. April Fool's Day. I run a superhero game. My big bad villain was going to do like an April Fool's Day thing, like a Joker type thing. And one of my players said, hey, are you going to do an April Fool's Day thing? And I said, maybe. And they said, please don't.
Like a mass genocide kind of thing? Or
No, like someone they were very close to took their own life on April 1st. So April 1st is not a fun holiday for them.
Gotcha.
So you don't know what's going to be someone's sort of trigger, you know, until you sort of, you know, come across it. So there's no way to tell. Like if I'm running a game, I'm not going to tell you all the plot points of the game, but having a good discussion with your players really works wonders there. But so here's one for you. What if so we're playing some sort of fantasy game, maybe the world's most popular role-playing game, and we're there and we have to go, you know, do something. There's some orcs, and I say, well, could we not use violence? What happens to a D&D game if you say no violence? You don't have a D&D game really anymore. Like it's hard, you know.
It becomes harder because structurally D&D is a game based mechanically on combat first.
Yeah.
And it's not secondary.
And I use it sort of as a joke, but as this idea that if I literally didn't like violence, D&D is not the game for me, and I shouldn't be playing D&D. And I'm not saying you can't run D&D without violence, but it's sort of baked into the system.
Again, it's a thing where it's important to have open conversations, know your players, know yourself, and hope that your players know themselves.
Yeah. All right. What is the Game Master's relationship with your players? Is it adversarial or is it collaborative? So a lot of old school GMs will tell you that they believe that it should be sort of an adversarial relationship. It's me against them. Okay, that's fine. But I mean, especially if you're sort of talking about gaming in educational settings, if you're gaming in therapeutic settings, I believe it should be collaborative. I believe you're all there together to have fun, and that means you can help your players along. And sometimes that means like, hey, this is a really good attack that you have. You could use this. And then they might say, oh, cool, I didn't even think of that.
At its basest, again, it comes down to that open communication. And if you're working together and being collaborative, that keeps that dialogue open. There are settings and games where the adversarial relationship does work. I know in 4th edition D&D, sort of the Adventurers Guild stuff, you know, when it was players versus GMs for one-shots, that worked really well, but not everyone responds well to that, especially in settings where you're trying to help and progress with emotionally heavy things.
Yeah. So I mean, I personally, but it can also ask you as a GM, as a facilitator, to sort of think about yourself and how you're running the game and what you want your relationship to do with the players. Now, it's not to say I can't run a difficult game and still be collaborative.
Yeah.
But in the sense that, like, I'm trying to help my players do well. Like, that's collaboration, as opposed to, like, no, I'm trying to screw you.
Well, and it's a storytelling thing.
Yeah.
So you can't necessarily, you don't tell a great story if there's not conflict.
So.
But the conflict doesn't have to be an internal me versus you. It can be us working together versus the world you've created.
Yeah, like, I'm creating a challenge for you. I'm telling you there's a challenge here. I want your characters to figure out this challenge. But like that doesn't mean that you have to help them with the challenge, but it means you're there to help them. You're not trying to screw them.
Yeah.
A couple more little things that we just talk about in games in general. Sid Meier, who created the Civilization games, has this interesting quote which says that a game is a series of interesting choices. And obviously he's a computer game designer, but I think that this is an interesting idea that if you think about a role-playing game especially, you can roll lots of dice, but think about those choices that are memorable. Think about the things you do that are memorable within the game. The screenwriter Robert Towne, when talking about movies, said a movie, I think, is really only 4 or 5 moments between two people. The rest of the movie exists to give those moments their impact and resonance. The script exists for that. Everything does. I like this idea too. Like if you can think about great moments in your role-playing game and try and build towards those and give the players these awesome moments that you can have really interesting times. And it's hard sometimes to get those great moments. And sometimes they can be a little ham-fisted, but sometimes ham-fisted is the way to go. All right, take a deep breath. Okay, now we're going to get into role-playing, R-O-L-L, which is really sort of about game rules. And the 10 sort of things we're going to discuss here are min-maxing, game behaviors, anything the players can do, intelligence checks, charisma checks, the evil king, search checks, superheroes, which is a favorite genre of mine, but also has some really interesting sort of internal discussions there if we dig down. Gaming the game, so we'll talk about some falling damage, and then XP and what XP means. So let's talk about min-maxing. So we have here a sort of standard D&D party. What do we have if we were to go left to right based on what we know about Dungeons and Dragons?
Wizard, rogue, fighter, ranger.
Yeah, right. We're pretty good there. So, and that's sort of, we know these archetypes from literature. We know these, like you pick up a fantasy book, there's going to be some sort of variation of this. Obviously, the Lord of the Rings book sort of started a lot of this, and we recognize a lot of the archetypes from there. All right. If you played the 3rd edition of D&D, what's this guy? Well, it's the spike chain fighter, which if you played a lot of 3rd edition was the default power game build. So you had a decent dex, a decent strength. The spike chain had a 10-foot reach, but you could also attack 5 feet with it. When you attacked with the spike chain, you could knock someone down.
And?
So they're knocked down, they're prone. When they try and stand up, you get an opportunity attack against them. With that opportunity attack, you can do what? Knock them down again. And again, you can be 10 feet away from them, and you can do this all day. Where's that guy in literature? He's nowhere, right? But like that became the default build. We didn't see a lot of like rogues like this. We saw a lot of this in 3rd edition.
But is that a problem?
No. So the rules are the expectation. Let your players lean into them. The rules are sort of the common language you have when you're playing a role-playing game. You're saying this is what we're going to do. These are the rules we're going to use. Full transparency. This is what we're going to do. And if a player says, "Great, I've built this character. I want to be good at these things," let them be good at them. I know that, and as a GM, I get frustrated with some systems where players like do sort of min-maxing. But then I find other systems. I don't blame the players. I say, let me find other systems and things to do.
If a system is predicated on min-maxing to be successful, you have to. You don't have to, but it benefits both you and the player to let them min-max if that's what they want to do.
Yeah.
It also means they're not good in certain areas. So if they're really good at chain fighting, but they're not good at int-based stuff, that may be able to help you create an interesting story for them.
Yeah.
By not just focusing on the fighting.
Yeah, but don't get frustrated by min-maxing if your players do it, especially if you're sort of, facilitating games for a group of clients as opposed to like your friends. Like, let them do it. Let them have fun with it. Let them have a good time. Don't sort of penalize them for that, because that's how they might enjoy the game. So don't say, well, you can't do that. So ask yourself, the rule system, the rules as written, what behaviors does your game encourage? So what behaviors does D&D encourage? What behaviors does a superheroes game encourage? What about angsty modern urban fantasy, which I think all of our things have a onyx path on the back. So we know what we're talking about there, right? So when we ask ourselves this question, this is not about putting our bias in play. This is literally about what the rules are about. So what do the rules focus on?
Where do the rules ask you to roll?
Yeah, and what are the expectations? So this is an image from Pathfinder, which of course is a D&D adjacent game. Based on the cover of this book, what do we think this game's about?
Come back to me.
lot of combat, right?
Fighting dragons.
What else are a lot of D&D type games based on? Finding treasure. So, I mean, literally, 4th edition and 5th edition to some degree is literally built upon your treasure sort of goes up with you. It sort of has to. The game's designed around you need to be here.
We like to break it down in our company as find the thing, save the princess, stop the monster, get back home.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's great. Those are awesome things too. There's nothing wrong with that. But just know what your game's about. Your game is sort of forcing you to this thing. So if the player's like, well, we want to find more treasure, that's because there's a lot of pages in the rules about treasure.
And you can't go into those games expecting players not to want that, right? You can't go into those
being mad if that's what they want.
No, I want to have a really thoughtful, heavily conversation-based game about court intrigue. People are going to go, well, why are you playing D&D?
Yeah. And you can do that in D&D if everyone's
but
on that
everybody
page.
has to be on board, and there has to be that agreement and that understanding.
I played a game at Gen Con. I played it with the designer of the game. It's this game where you're aliens from another planet, and rock and roll's been outlawed. It's called Star Children, I think is the current iteration of it. Has anyone heard of this? Or Velvet Generation?
Sounds awesome.
Velvet Generation, I think, is the 2nd edition of the game. And you're all members of a band, and you're fighting against the man, and the man has outlawed music, and it's really cool. Do you know what the latter half of the game was? One big dumb combat. And my character had no combat skills, so I'm just like, what? It really
I want to
took
play
the
guitar
shine
in
off the game.
a weird Kiss music video.
And I'm not saying there can't be
Yeah.
a little bit of combat, but literally it just became this grind, and I'm like, this is not fun. And that's not what I wanted that game to be about. I wanted it to be about fighting the man. But when we talk about games, look at the rules. Read the rules. What do they tell you they're about? Maya Angelou has a great quote. When people show you who they are, believe them. We can translate this to role-playing games. When a game shows you what it is, believe it. So we can say we're going to play D&D this way, blah, 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 blah. But when a player's like, I want to be good at combat, well, that's what a lot of the rules are about. Okay. So anything the players can do. So here we have I think this one has a hammer and a spike, so maybe she's doing a little trepanation, but someone's sleeping. So we have this whole idea. Has anyone seen this in D&D, where your players come up with a great plan to kill your villain? You could use a little scry, use a little teleport, use a little coup de grace, right? They're sleeping, they're defenseless, right? Now, in the game of Dungeons and Dragons, are your villains generally higher or lower level than your PCs? Yeah, which means they can do this before the heroes can. Now, if you were to be like, you start a game and you're like, da-da-da, oh, except you're dead. What? Yeah, they killed you when you were asleep, so we're going to move on, right? Now, we can laugh at it, but there's nothing saying players can't do it, there's nothing saying you can't do it either. So this is one of these discussions you can have and be like, sure, you can do this, but let's not live our lives with the villains need to be on constant watch or whatever. It's sort of the, we have a long-running superhero game, and kind of the joke is that superheroes and supervillains are like, yeah, we put on masks and we do this stuff, and that's sort of an acceptable thing that we do. So with your players, you can be like, yes, I know you can do this, but do you really want to open that can of worms, because that means I can do it, and I don't know. It's just one of those things, players will find these sort of strategies and tactics. This is called scry and die, this basic sort of thing here. And, I can't say that as a player I've never done it, but, it's a tough one. The other thing, too, is you have one GM, and we all have a single mindset, and our brains work a certain way. You have 4 players, you have 6 players, you have 8 players. They get to bounce ideas off of each other, and they have more tools at their disposal. So they can come up with plans.
It also, especially when you're working with clients who are neurotypical, players who are neurotypical, they may think in very different ways from how you're expecting a traditional player to think. So you'll get some really off-the-wall plans, and while it may not be what you expected, it's really important to roll with it.
Yeah, and so, current edition of D&D is very sort of granular and specific. So, you cast a fireball, tells you exactly what it does. Early editions, there was a lot of room for interpretation, and this whole idea that, if you cast a fireball in a dungeon, it sucks up all the oxygen, and da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da, and people get real specific and stuff. And that's really cool. And the rules allowed for that because there wasn't this very specific thing. D&D 5e is written very much this, but not this.
Yeah.
And you can't say that changes. There's like famous game designers who write all these essays about things you can do to your players, and it's about, if you're playing D&D, have them like, break the other person's hand. And I'm like, you can do that, but the rules don't allow for that. The game has hit points. Like, how much damage do I take? That's the way the game works.
Not 40K and you can't target a body
Yeah,
part.
yeah. And if you want to play a game like that, great. But again, the rules
Find that game,
the
yeah.
rules are the same for the players and the GM.
Well,
Yeah.
what's to stop the GM in that moment? You say, I aim for the head, I'm going to chop his head off. Or
Yeah.
They roll and you say, well, you go for the head, but he managed to deflect you, but you nick his neck and take some points off, but you
Yeah.
definitely don't kill him.
Yeah, but it's that idea where, but if there are GMs who say that's the way you get players, is instead of just saying, I rolled a hit, you give these very specific things, or like, I'm going to, slice your Achilles tendon so you can't walk anymore, and you're like, that's not the way D&D works.
Well,
Like,
it's also, a lot of people get into D&D now because of actual play podcasts.
Yeah.
But a thing to keep in mind is with those podcasts, they're going rule of cool and sort of fudging the rules a lot.
Yeah.
And, while it's awesome that people are getting more and more interested in gaming, you have to, again, let them know it's not quite the same as like Critical Role or Taz, because maybe you are more stringent with the rules, or maybe you're looser with the rules.
And maybe our players want to
Yeah.
be stringent with the rules. So,
Yeah.
for example, in 3rd edition, does everyone know 3rd edition D&D to some degree? There's all the stuff about the little grid and the movement, and I had one friend who's a GM, who I don't play with because our styles do not mesh, but he's like, I don't like the grid and I'm not going to use it. Well, the domino effect of that is staggering because there's all these feats built upon using the grid.
Almost
And-
every move, like special attack, has a grid-based effect.
And I said to him very clearly, I said, that's really fine, you can do that, but you need to sort of err on the side of the players.
Yeah.
You can't like try and screw the players over, because you would constantly be like, oh, well, you provoke an attack of opportunity, and you're like, what are you talking about? Like, there's no grid. How did I? Well, by the way you described your action, you're like, are you kidding me? And so he'd always err in favor of himself, and I'm like, well, that's just
Again,
not
that's
fun.
not playing collaboratively.
Yeah, for sure.
Was that specific to 3? Because, I mean, as far as I know, you could always play in Theater of the Mind.
3rd edition really needed the
It
grid.
really relied on the grid.
Really,
specifically,
like
yeah.
the grid was really sort of baked into the rules, and there were variations of it that didn't use it, but literally a lot of class abilities, a lot of race abilities, a lot of feats, a lot of everything was really based on the sort of the grid and your movement.
If
and the
someone
whole thing.
passed by you within like a certain number of squares, that sort of thing.
and certain weapons did a thing here.
Yeah.
So, if I'm playing a strong character, do I need to show how strong I am? No. If I'm playing a character with a high constitution, do I need to prove that I can climb up 10 flights of stairs without getting winded? No. If I'm playing a wizard, do I need to know how to cast a fireball? No.
We have a great wizard in the private campaign, and I felt like D&D Dads, he calls himself the math magician.
The mathematician, nice.
The most common spell he does is a PowerPoint.
There you go.
Love it.
He puts up a PowerPoint in lectures, and it always gives everyone in the group +1 to their
Take 5d6 boredom, Dan.
Not it, they get an inspiration point.
But I've seen situations, and even really good GMs will sometimes be like, well, how do you attack? They'll ask the fighter. I don't know, I'm not a fighter.
And it's one thing to ask, like, what's your approach? Like, how are you trying to go about it? Like,
Yeah, and I'll do that sometimes,
Yeah.
but I'll then say, I'll give you a list of options. I'll be like, are you trying to do this? Are you trying to do this?
like, what's your end goal? Is the
Yeah,
question.
and then they'll say, oh, okay.
Versus, how are you trying to attack is a very broad, vague question.
And that's where you can pull from those podcasts and
Yeah.
Critical Role. 'Cause,
Absolutely.
Matt Mercer does a great job of, describe what you're doing, and then when they finish off the characters, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
And it's like, they're literally like, oh, now I get to describe something awesome.
Yeah, and describing the awesome things are like, that's what we should all be focusing towards.
I think a really good way to do that and to get buy-in from your audience or clients is what's that look like?
Yeah.
That's a really
when
good
you're
one.
doing this, tell me about it. What does it look like? What do you see?
Sure.
And then, just go like that.
Especially so when you play, I've noticed with people who are neurodivergent or very introverted or sometimes young kids, they're very internalized in what they're imagining all the cool things.
Cool
they're
things
doing.
happen here.
Not a word comes out.
Yeah.
So asking them, what does it look like, is a great way to execute that.
Sure.
So, we're not going to talk about it here. So we designed a game for Spectrum called RetroStar, which you played RetroStar. So RetroStar is built upon this idea: when you do something, you're not describing the specificity of what you're doing. You're sort of talking about what your goal is. And I don't mean like my goal is to be a millionaire, but sort of like what you want to do in a scene. So you're not trying to, you're trying to sneak past the guard to get into the room is your sort of end goal. So it's not one roll to sneak, one roll to lock, So it's all this thing. So it's called the intention system. It's based on this idea of like, I'm not concerned with the specifics of like little things. I want to know what you're trying to do in a big picture.
Okay.
So, and when you roll in this system, what happens is you either succeed or you fail, or there's a lot of results in the middle. And in the middle, what happens is you can either maintain control of your character, but you'll probably fail. Or you can succeed, but you give up control of your character. And then this creates your stories that go this way. So, here I am, I'm talking to the evil princess, and I need the evil princess to, sort of do something, and I say, well, I'm going to try and charm the evil princess, and I succeed, but give up control of my character. In the next scene, there we are getting married.
Okay, so they basically lose they lose narrative control.
They do,
So,
but it creates really interesting story moments in the sense that you're like, and you're like, wait, how did that happen? We don't care how it happened. We're at the next point in the story. And then you don't say, well, now you're married. You say, now you're in this situation. And it's designed to emulate 70s sci-fi, so think Buck Rogers, think Battlestar Galactica. But it's a really fun game. So Nate played the game, right?
I did.
And it's a lot of fun because it's you have to really change your mindset in terms of the way you think about gaming, but it's this idea of it's not about the specific actions, it's about what you're trying to do. So, climbing up the thing is like one scene in a TV show. So it's not about like every roll for 30 feet. It's just about like, okay, you're trying to get to the top. Great. Let's get you to the top and let's figure it out.
And it's about comfort with ceding some level of narrative control and player
having trust,
agency.
yeah.
So
But
it is again playing collaboratively.
And again, in that game, I don't kill any characters.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to live.
Is there a way that a player can, if not if they necessarily fail, but if they want like an additional bonus or whatever, that they can just be like, I'm going to give up the next scene, or 2 scenes from now, I'll cede that to you, but for this one, I need to do this really cool thing right now.
Well, sure. There's subtleties to the game, and like I said, there are times when you have that choice. You can maintain control of your character, but you may not succeed.
Okay.
So you sort of have this idea of, are you willing to sort of let the story go in a weird direction, or do you have to hold on to control your character? So it's a very different sort of idea and stuff there. But back to our PowerPoint, back to 5d6 of boredom damage. But we do sometimes ask players to solve puzzles. Why do we do that? We're not asking the strong player to show how strong they are, or the strong character.
I've also been in a lot of games where I tend to play charismatic characters, and I will have my GMs ask me to prepare full speeches to rouse crowds, and I'm like, man, I just got off a full shift of work.
Yeah.
I'm really tired. I want to have fun. I don't want to put together a 10-minute long speech. Can I give you like the vague idea and make the roll?
Yeah. And so here's the little nugget of advice, the kernel of truth here. If your game would be derailed because a smart character might solve a riddle, you might want to reconsider how you structure your game. You know what I mean? Like, if your game is really relying upon this. And at the same time, if your game is going to be derailed if they don't figure out how to solve a riddle, you also need to figure out how you restructure your game. And the whole point is we just want to keep moving forward. Why? Like, okay, here's a riddle. I'm just going to sit back and laugh while you can't figure it out because I'm so clever.
Here's another thing with riddles, and I think we're going to touch more on it later.
Yeah.
But if it's a riddle that you might be able to look up online, players have their phones, they have those tools, and they should be allowed to use those, right? It's part of what makes it fun. So if a player, I'm sitting here, I can't figure out what the answer is, I don't know. You can say, use the
your phone,
tools at your disposal.
Yeah. Yeah, I tend to not run games that ask players to forsake any knowledge that they have. I just let them embrace it. It's fine. So it's all good. So how does your system of choice handle intelligence checks? Like, are there rules for intelligence checks? So you can have an intelligence stat. How's our intelligence checks? We have lots of rules for combat. Intelligence check, roll a d20, add 7. Okay, blah, 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 blah. So think about that. Again, back to that core idea. I may not be strong, but my character is. I may not be smart, but my character is.
That's my favorite line to use in games.
Yeah.
I'm not feeling smart tonight, but I know my character is.
My character is smart. Yeah. All right. Here we go. So when I leveled up, I got skill focused foot massage, and then we can ask ourselves, are your non-combat roles as engaging as your combat roles? There are games that try and sort of make non-combat stuff like combat. It's a mixed bag of success with that.
It's tough because conversations with actual human people tend not to be, okay, now I roll to talk, now you roll to talk.
Yeah.
It's going to be a weird translation.
Yeah. But we have the idea of the evil princess, so we're going to attempt to seduce the evil queen, right? There's the evil queen. Bad idea. What do the rules say about seduction? Are there any rules about seduction? What do the rules say about them? Does your game system allow for such a thing, and can you as a GM allow for this type of swerve? So, a power gamer may want to seduce the evil queen because they have a high charisma. But if legitimately they're like, I'm going to try and seduce it because my guy's a Lothario and whatever, and he's a horn dog, great. Let it happen. See what happens in the game. Like, now the evil queen is sort of an ally, sort of an enemy. Like, that can be really interesting in your game.
It can cause all sorts of interesting sort of domino effects.
Yeah, and Ellie plays in a lot of my games, and Ellie loves being a social player character and loves making friends with all sorts of characters, enemies and fellow heroes. So then we'd ask the question, does your system produce interesting results? So if your system does have rules for seduction or communicating with a fellow person and trying to sway them or whatever, does it produce an interesting result?
Well, and here's a question. If the player fails the roll to seduce the
what
evil
happens?
queen,
Is it just, can they try again? Because a lot of systems are like, you can try again, -2 penalty, or you can try again and your friends can... That's not the way it works. Like, you try and seduce someone, you hit on them, it doesn't work.
It's worth it to make the failure have as much of an impact as the success. Failure tells interesting stories.
Now, let's flip that around. What happens when... Ready? If your player gets seduced, do your rules produce interesting results? So if anyone knows, this is from what, Ellie?
Parks and Rec.
Parks and Recreation. So the one character, he had a penchant for a certain type of women and would just go off the rails when, like, he'd meet these types of women. And it was very funny, but it was this idea that, like, he would get seduced and make terrible choices. So it's that idea, are you willing to be like, yeah, I'll let it happen, but it's that sort of basic core idea. Does anyone know the game Monster Hearts? So Monster Hearts is a game, I would say it's the closest thing to a Buffy game there is. And that
it emulates the combination of sort of like hormone-addled teenagehood and like also we're all monstrous because we're teenagers. It's a really interesting game with a lot of thematically interesting things going on, but it hits both those points that Buffy has, where there is fighting and there is romance.
There is, and it's actually more focused on the social stuff, and there's a lot of interesting rules for the social stuff. So here's their rule for if you try and turn someone on. When you turn someone on, you roll with hot. Hot is one of the stats. On a 10 up, which is a good roll, you take a string against them. A string is like a +2 in the future. It's like it's currency.
But it's also like social. It's not just a +2, but you can trade it with other.
But
players.
they know you have it. Basically, that character knows that you have power over them in some way. So if you want to do something against them in the future, you
have a bonus to it, or you have something to trade to them in the future.
Now, where it gets weird is that 7 to 9, the sort of mixed result. They choose, meaning the person you're trying to seduce, they choose. They can give themselves to you. What that means is up to you and the players. Like, it doesn't
have to be literal,
They can promise you something they think you want, or they can give you a string. So now, if these rules work both ways, so say I the GM is trying to seduce a player character's character, and then you get to choose, then you can choose what happens. So you can say, that didn't happen. You get a choice of what 3 things might happen. You can say, well, my character will give themselves to you, it's fine, we're done with it, whatever. I'm a conquest, let's move on. Or they can promise something they think you want, or you can give them a string. You can be like, no, you don't get my body, but you have sort of currency against me in the future. That to me is an interesting result. So that's an example of one system. So that does things something. All right. So here we go. You're standing before the boy king. He sits upon his throne made up of the swords of his vanquished foes, right? What's most players going to do? I draw my sword. Let's roll initiative, right? He's not even armed. He's got a sword beside him. He's 12. So in D&D, your solution is you have to stat the boy king up to be a really high level, right? Because if not, they'll just kill him. Because there's no other way to sort of deal with that. So you as a game master might want to impress upon the players the majesty and power of the boy king. However, at the end of the day, you need to stat him up. And in D&D, this means you need to figure out some way that you can make them quiver in fear at the throat of the boy king, but without having to sort of cheese the numbers to be like, yes, how could a 12-year-old be a 15th level fighter and a 15th level magic user and whatever. And, again, that's a choice of system. So what does your system do there? All right. So we have the Princess Bride, of course. Would the Princess Bride have been as compelling if all along we knew that the Count was the man with 6 fingers? Right, that's a pretty climactic moment in the movie, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So sometimes we want to do that. So then we move on to this and we say the DM is like, oh, you noticed that the Count has 6 fingers on his hand. What's any player going to say?
I pull out my sword.
I pull out my sword. I'm going to kill this guy. And then you don't get the cool speech. As a GM, we might want to create our moments, but if our rules don't encourage those moments, what are we playing for? Or are we playing fair? So in a situation like this, if you want to have this cool moment, think of something beforehand. Give the players this idea that like, hey, if in combat you make a cool speech, I'll give you +2 to hit.
Sure.
But here's the thing. Ellie's my player. She's had a rough day at work. It's, the time for ratings and things are really stressful. And I say, well, you can make your cool speech and gain a bonus. And Ellie's like,
I don't want to make a speech.
I'm tired. So sometimes you have to deal with your players as they are, and you may not get those moments. But again, what does your system encourage? What does your system do? So.
And I think moments will happen organically. I think it's a lot harder to try to plan moments for your player. Leave the base work, obviously, but it's up to them to buy in or not.
Yeah, and when you add in things, and just be careful adding stuff like, if you do this, you get a bonus, because some players are really going to dig into that.
Min-max it, as it
and
were.
they're going to min-max it.
Yeah.
And the players that you want to do it are not going to do it because they're not in the mood. All right. Here we got a guy in front of a cave. It's a search check. So in the 5th edition of the world's most popular role-playing game, is this perception or investigation? Is it active or passive? D&D for a while had these sort of passive rolls, which was like 10 plus your da-da-da-da-da, and you might notice something or whatever, etc., etc., etc. Okay. The characters live in the world, just like we live in this world. Your characters live in the world. The players' characters live in the world. If your rules allow for search checks, if they say, yes, you can do a search and this is the DC, not allowing them to do so is a bait and switch. I know GMs that are like, no, you can't make a search check. You need to tell me what you're searching. You need to tell me what you're doing.
Specify where you're searching.
You didn't say you were looking on the bookshelf for a specific book. You didn't say you were looking for nanites. This happened in a game of mine. We all made search checks. We didn't notice anything. Something happened, and then GM said, well, you didn't say you were looking for nanites. To which all of us said,
nanites were a thing.
We're like, we didn't know that was a thing. Like, come on. Do you know what I mean? Like, but our characters live in the world. They're the ones who live there and are immersed there. You know, how many times in our games are really like, well, your character didn't say they were going to the bathroom. We don't do that, right? But in real life, we have to go to the bathroom. Like, that's a thing that happens. But we don't have games about that. Like, come on, let the characters shine in their world. If the game allows for a search check, let them make a search check and move on. If your game is going to grind to a halt because they find something you didn't want them to find, figure out some other way to do it. There we go. If you put the characters in a locked room, you're clever, you put them in a locked room, you need to allow them a chance to figure out a way out, okay? And the way out is not necessarily the way you thought of. Let them come up with something else. So if they're like, well, I'm going to, shave rock down, and I'm going to da-da-da-da-da, and I'm going to try and, because I saw this thing in a movie once, and I'm going to try and soften the metal by doing this. As a GM, be like, oh, okay.
I was playing in an old game that we had a reunion game for, and we were fighting hopping zombies, and one of our fighters was a martial artist who specialized in fighting with a broom, and I went, hey, I know the mythology, hopping zombies are weak to brooms. GMs didn't know that, and they were like, oh, but yeah, you're right, okay, go for it.
Yeah.
So you have to roll with it sometimes.
And there are times where, like, I played games where, like, he put all the player characters, like, in a prison, and we were supposed to break out, and he's like, you didn't do this thing, and we're like, we gave you...
You didn't do it the right way.
We sat there for 2 hours trying to figure out a way out, and he's like, well, you didn't do this thing, and you're like, we gave you a bunch of ideas, and you just shot them all down. That's bad GMing, in my opinion. Be open to the new ideas. Say, cool, that's great. Rule of cool.
And
right?
I think another great thing to put in your player's lexicon is, I don't live in the world, but my character does. Just like, I'm not feeling smart tonight, but my character is.
Yeah.
Is there anything they'd know that I can't think of? Is there anything that I'm missing as a player that you as a GM think I should be remembering?
Yeah.
Those kind of language, having that kind of rapport with your players is a great thing to do.
Yeah. So we're gonna talk a little. We're gonna sort of talk about min-maxing again. So if you're playing a game, most firearms are dexterity based. We know that Spider-Man has a really high dexterity, right? So Spider-Man's like, great, I'm gonna take the combat shotgun, right? Because that's what Spider-Man does,
Spider-Man.
right? Because Spider-Man uses a gun. That's not really the way superheroes work. Like, it can be, but I don't like superheroes like that. I like my superheroes to feel super and heroic. So, are you guys superhero fans at all? Anyone? No? Not
Over
your
there,
jam?
yeah.
Yes?
Yeah.
So we got the Bat family. We'll fly through this real quick, right? We got the Bat family, right? How are the characters different? In most systems, Batman would be the highest level, then Nightwing, then Babs, and that's not a lot of fun to play a character who's not as powerful as the other characters.
Yeah.
If you read the comics, they're shockingly different. We can go even better if you know comics. We have Plastic Man and Elongated Man, both DC products. They're both silly, stretchy detectives. There are some subtleties in their powers, but in reality, they're very different. But in a lot of systems, they would be pretty much the same.
Statted up almost identically.
All right. If you like superheroes, if I was to run a game set in the DC universe, we know DC, Batman, Superman. Ellie, who'd you want to play?
Power Girl.
Who else would you want to play?
Misfit, who is a very obscure Birds of Prey character.
What about you? Who'd you want to play?
I'll be honest, I do not have that level of knowledge.
You don't have that level now? Nate, what about you?
Oh, man. I definitely played something like, I'd probably do something in like the Batman. Like,
The Batman
Yeah.
family? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm a member, like, I do love superheroes, and we'll get off this quick, because you're not my crowd. But this won't surprise you, I don't think. So in a lot of groups, I'll ask people, or people will ask, like,
What do they want to play?
Who would you want to play? And so survey says Green Lantern, Flash, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Martian Manhunter, and Zatanna. We'll add in Constantine, because people like the curse words, right? Statistically, in most superhero systems, what can we say about all these characters?
They're really strong.
They're the most powerful characters. That's not very fun. So what all the characters have in common, they're made with the most character points. So here's another Superman thing for you. So if you're playing superhero games, if you've seen the Zack Snyder Superman, he kills Zod and everyone's all upset. Forgetting, of course, that Christopher Reeve killed people in the old Superman movies. That's a little selective memory
Or the
there.
fact that every time you punch a guy into a building, you go
Yeah.
down. How many were in the building?
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. But the joke is that the rules for subdual damage are really complicated, which in most superhero games they are. So it's this idea that you're like, well, you can want me to subdue them because that's the way the game works, but it's just difficult. It's just easier for me to punch them. So We're done with supers now, for now. Here you go. Tell your players you're trapped in a tower over 500 feet high. And they're like, oh wow, it's 500 feet down, I'm trapped, what am I gonna do? Any ideas? High level campaign. They don't have any fly, their spells don't work.
No feather fall.
No feather fall. So they say, I jump out the window. 500 feet, right? Why can they do that? Well, because the maximum damage they can take is 20d6.
Again, that's leaning into the rules,
It's leaning
understanding
into the rules, and you
rules.
can be mad, but at the same time, like,
You gotta give it to them.
and here's the little rules. Falling. A fall from a great height is one of the most common hazards faced in an adventure. At the end of a fall, the creature takes 1d6 bludgeoning damage for every 10 feet it fell to a maximum of 20d6. The creature lands prone. Oh, so you're prone for 1 round. Unless it avoids taking damage from the fall. So 500 feet, 20d6, I roll, your average is going to be 3.5, you're going to take 70 points of damage.
Yeah.
If you're playing a high-level campaign, you're like, I can shrug that off. Like, I'm good. And we all can laugh at it, and it's ridiculous, but that's the way the rules work. And a player can say that to you, and you can't get mad. You can't say, no, you'd be pulp. You'd be a red pulp on the ground. And they can say, oh, that's what we're playing D&D. In
Yeah.
D&D, that's not the way it works. In D&D, I played a game, and the GM was like, oh, this, ringed wall of razor sharp blades appears. There's literal like razor blades like everywhere, and they're just. And one of the players goes, oh, that's blade bearer. That's 15d6 damage max. It's a reflex save for half. I have a decent reflex save. I just walked through it. The GM's like, no, don't you understand? There's blades everywhere. And it's like, yeah, it's 15d6 max damage. I get a reflex save for half, so I'm going to tumble through it and take my half damage. And you could just see the GM get deflated. Because they were like, but I came up with this really cool idea. But they're playing D&D, and in D&D we know that that's the way Blade Barrier works. You can't change the rules. All right. So does everyone know D&D? Is that a common language, roughly? All right, so we've got a black dragon. What's a breath weapon?
Acid.
Yup, we got a blue dragon.
Ice. Lightning.
Lightning? I think it's lightning.
Is it
Green
white?
dragon.
Poison.
Poison. Red dragon.
Fire.
White dragon.
Ice.
Blah, blah, blah. So I was playing a game, and the GM describes a dragon, and one of the players goes, what color is the dragon? And the GM gets all pissed.
But you have to understand, in the world of D&D, it's a common knowledge thing.
Yeah, it's
People
like...
are going to know the color of a dragon and associate it with what the dragon does.
Yeah, and that's the way the game works, and that's fine. That's the person literally leaning into the game in the right way. They're not power gaming, they're literally like, oh, what color is it? Like, that
Yeah.
tells us what... And yes, it's so they can avoid that type of damage, but that's the way the game is designed. So, some of that mystery is gone. That's okay. Who cares?
But they're metagaming, and so you as a player might know that it's it's an ice dragon. Okay,
Sure.
Fine, great. Well, if your character has no idea about this, they're a shopkeep from Waterdeep. They've never been outside of a place. They have no idea. Then you shouldn't have that knowledge. You should know that it's this, or you could go ahead and roll for it to see if they might have that kind of arcane knowledge.
Sure, you can, but so the question I'd ask, and I'm not being confrontational, but the question I'd ask you is who cares? So if they know that it's ice damage, great, that's fine.
Yeah,
but then the player knowing shows that they're engaged with the game. Is that what we want, ideally?
Sure.
So they know it's ice
This
damage.
is where the rule, yes, but, no, and comes in very handy, because it's like, can I jump out of the tower? Yes, but when you land, there's 30 orcs standing around you. You just took 70 points of damage, and now they're attacking you. So
Sure.
You could do that, or you could say...
But you have to tell about the orcs beforehand that they could see them down at the bottom.
Well, it's from 500 feet. You can't see that far. I can argue that.
Hey, it's foggy,
Or they
sure.
rush out when you come on.
Well, they rush out from the doors,
Did
see
you
you
heard
down,
this?
and land prone on the ground going,
Yeah.
Sure, but again, it's one of these, it's...
But you do it in interest, my argument here is you're doing it in interest of enjoyment. This is not
Yeah.
antagonism where I'm
Sure.
trying to defeat your players. It's saying, And it's the common agreement you make with your players, just as much as you agree to be a cooperative player with them, they're agreeing to be cooperative with you.
Sure.
And I think the question we ultimately come to is, does the color of the dragon,
No.
knowing the color, does it matter? Does it cause the game to break down?
But it's like, so
And hopefully not.
You know what color the dragon is, yes.
Yeah.
You defeat it? No.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like,
If you're a level 1 character and you see a blue dragon,
Oh, no, it shoots lightning, at least I'm gonna die in the.
yeah, great. I'm protected from lightning. I'll take half of the 20d6 damage, but I'm still first level, so that's going to be a lot of damage. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Run
Well,
that.
I mean, this is why you have the session zero in a lot of ways. You sit down with your players,
Sure.
you say, where do we stop playing? And I think that's a key in a game where there's literally no ending.
Sure, yeah,
You
absolutely.
don't have to end characters. You know, with the group of dads I play with, we always sit back and say, what level do we all agree is kind of OP and we're done playing? And
Yeah.
there's a certain cutoff point where we say, yeah, it's not fun anymore.
It's a good
because
conversation
You now
to have.
become Superman, and, you know, literally the only thing that can kill you is this green rock that's obscured from the
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and that's a good discussion to have, like where you're going to keep going, and you can sort of keep presenting challenges, and we will talk about a little bit of some stuff, some ideas along that too, about sort of the role ROLE playing, sort of how to enjoy some stuff like that. So, okay, so supers are not your jam. So we all know the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So there was a Marvel game that came out, and you could play as Iron Man, and you gained XP. You could gain 1 XP, 5 XP, or 10. 10 was a lot. You gained 1 XP when you suggested a solution to a problem that invokes either Stark technology or millions of dollars. That seems like a Tony Stark thing to do. You get 3 XP when you inflict mental stress on an ally who disagrees with your methods. So you're encouraging Tony Stark to play like a jerk, right?
you're encouraging antagonistic interplayer.
Yeah, which is fine, but like that's going to be every session.
Yeah.
Every session, that's going to be that way.
Especially if you have a Tony Stark that likes to get XP.
Yeah. For 10 XP, when you either take a position of great power or realize that some people do not have access to your considerable resources and dedicate all of them to social justice. Okay, it's aspirational, and maybe that's what we want, right? But I can find this great comic panel, if you know comics. It's this meme, Kitty Pryde saying Tony Stark is a jerk. So with this XP system, what you're encouraging Tony Stark to be a jerk every session to gain his little 3 XP. That's fine, and we can talk
But
about
is it
that.
fun?
Yeah. I argue that experience is not just for statistics. It's not just about leveling up. It's sort of about growing and changing as a player. There's a game out there that has an XP system where you define sort of benchmarks of things you want your character to do, and that's when you gain XP when you accomplish those things, which in my opinion is the opposite of what a game should be. Like, I don't know what I want to do. I just started. Like, I'm low level. Like, you know, I mean, I maybe want to become king, but there's a lot of steps in between. Like, and it's your job as GM to throw me wrinkles to my plans and to sort of change the way I think about my character. I played in a game where the GM encouraged us to be evil characters, and several of us did. And then he got really frustrated with us, and I took him aside and I said, look, I said, my character has done these things in the past, and I made this character a certain way, but my character now is doing things a certain way. I said, I'm hoping that you and I can sort of come to a place where my character has like a face turn and becomes a good guy. But I said, but I want it to happen in game. It needs to happen organically. It needs to happen in game. And he couldn't handle that. Like, he couldn't figure out a way to sort of figure out how to do that. But that's, in my opinion, what XP should be. Sort of not just leveling up, but also your character growing and changing through time. All right, here we have John McClane. Does anyone remember any failed roles they have in a role-playing game?
Yeah.
We can remember some.
Usually it's the critical fail.
Yeah, usually it's the critical fail. So I would argue that a lot of game systems don't really produce interesting failures. It's just sort of like, fail, you can try again. You know, but in life, I would argue failure is what creates interesting moments for us, and we will talk about that a bit more. But this idea that, like, if your failure is interesting, you're going to remember it, okay? And that's where your growth can come in. But XP is also, you have games, and like D&D, like anyone can multi-class and do these things now, but there are games that are sort of strict about how you do things, like once you make a choice, you have that choice. Well, if you're Dr. Ken Jeong, MD, You then change, I mean, literally this guy's a medical doctor. He went to Duke Medical School, and then he's like, I'm going to become a stand-up comedian. And then he was in The Hangover, and now he's, everywhere. Sometimes your characters change, and this change is something that XP can do. So when you're all of a sudden like, my fighter's going to give up the sword, and I'm going to become a wizard. Cool. Like, awesome.
Yeah.
Like, do that. That's a neat thing to do.
Some systems can do this without XP. If you have players who aren't beholden to the XP system, you can play games that don't do XP. Because we are superhero fans, I play in the ongoing superhero game. My character doesn't gain XP.
Superheroes don't gain XP, really.
But she changes and develops based on the story. So sometimes I may get different powers or, tap into a different facet of who the character is.
So a question for you. What is XP rewarded for?
Usually not doing things.
Yeah. Success, right?
Yeah.
There's this new idea in a lot of games where you get XP only when you fail rolls. Anytime you fail a roll, you gain XP.
See, I developed a game where you use the XP, we use focus points, so they call it. We use it in-game, out-of-game all the time. So
Sure.
It's like, hey, Johnny brought treats for everyone, hey, you get some.
Oh, sure. Yeah. The bribe the GM tax.
Yeah, but like on top of that, like you also get these aspects of the players that are looking for ways to reward each other.
Absolutely.
And it's both for failure and success. So it's like, wow, you totally failed, but I'm glad you tried that. That's pretty amazing. It takes some grit.
That's a way to build positive expectations.
Yeah.
And like do positive behavior. It's been a while. Positive behavior.
Yeah.
Affirmation.
Come from failure.
Well, that's fiction is failure. Yeah. So it's this idea. So think about a D&D game. If we all know D&D, if that's our common language, think about if every time a character failed a roll, they gained XP, but they didn't gain XP for anything they did, like winning. You didn't gain XP for killing the monsters. You gained XP for times you failed a roll.
So in one of our own games, we've got it so that the, for one, basically are ignoring XP as far as the book goes. You're just like,
we gained from 4 sessions, everyone goes up a level.
It's something like that. It depends on how the story's progressing.
Sure, for sure.
We need to, because we're now going to be facing bigger bad guys, whatever. But with the, instead of working with that, we are using inspiration points, and the way that we've been doing that is that, like, the DM usually will award one, and then the group themselves, and that way you get everybody to buy in. Everybody tries to go ahead and role play their asses off.
Yeah.
Because if you have a really cool scene and I remember it by the end of the session, for 4 hours, and man, at the beginning, when you were in that conversation with that guy, I really thought he was going to rip your head off, but you turned it around.
Yeah.
And then even if you failed a roll,
it
was still a good scene.
Yeah.
And so I'm giving you those points because of that. And that's...
It's great to have that engagement from players.
And there's
and maybe it's just the crew that I'm playing with on that particular thing there, but I mean...
Well, that's the thing, you're all on the same page. So the Cypher system by Monty Cook, which is this weird sort of D20 variant, when you gain inspiration... So anytime you gain inspiration, so they have a mechanic for it, you gain one you have to give to someone else.
Oh, I like that. That's neat.
So, but it's that same idea that like it sort of creates this sort of thing here. Now, and we could do a deep dive and we could discuss how what you're describing is great until it isn't. Because here's the couple seated at the table and they're just always going to be like, well, you're great. I'll give you XP. And they don't like this other guy sitting over here. And I'm not saying it's what you're doing is wrong. But what I'm saying is there are weird dynamics and things. But what's great is when your rules can encourage that. So again, if we're playing D&D and every time you fail to roll, you put a little X on your thing, people would be willing to try things a little bit more, right? They'd be willing to be like, yeah, I'll try that, because like failure's cool. That's how I gain XP. And we've all played with that player who succeeds all the time.
Yeah.
Who's always like, I hit. And if you didn't gain XP, if you only gain XP when you fail, everyone else is going up levels, and they're like, well, I'm winning, I'm the best, but everyone else is improving.
In a way, Kids on Bikes kind of does that because of the adversary tokens. When you fail, you get points for that, and it essentially makes you, at least for the session, more powerful because now you can spend that currency later on
Yeah.
can assist somebody else or to prevent another failure.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. There's a lot of games that are trying different approaches to XP. And so one game, Monster Hearts, sort of you have 4 stats. You have hot, cold, dark, and physical violence or whatever.
Yeah, I can't remember.
I
what it's
forget
called.
what
Oh
it's
my
called. So
God.
it's basically like punching.
Strong.
And early editions of the game, your GM highlighted a stat that they wanted you to use. You gained XP anytime
And
you
it was
used that stat.
each session they
Each
highlight
session,
a different one.
and
so-
then the players would be like, I want you to use this stat. So
Yeah.
you could have a player who always is like, well, I just play the strong guy. And you're like, well, I want you to use charisma.
Or you could have a character.
You know, so
that's-
anytime you make a
someone that's
charisma roll,
playing
that's when
an
you gain
introverted
XP.
character, and you want them to roll high. You want them to be a little like fiercer,
Yeah.
a little more wild, and that's
So it's sort of that
interesting.
collaborative thing, but that idea for like,
Yeah.
you know, you could sort of choose the things and your GM will be like, I want you to try this session. And so then you have to sort of get out of your comfort zone a little. So there are lots of different approaches to XP and sort of things you can do. But again, what does your game encourage and how you can do it? So now we can move on to the second part, which is role, R-O-L-E playing. Our 10 bullet points here are going to be your NPCs to go along with your wandering PCs, immersion, character behaviors, backstory, niche protection. Everyone's the hero of their story, open secrets, recaps, mysteries, and revealing the plot of your story. Okay, so we've got a pretty famous map here. We started way up there in the top, in the Shire. We ended up wandering down, right? We all know this map, Middle Earth, right? The classic, a lot of D&D is sort of based on this idea of you start in a village, but eventually you're going to travel the world, right? So we all do that. However, I'm going to suggest to you, consider having a home base, because if the GM and players want to focus on any sort of NPC relationships, if you want to have NPC relationships in your game, a home base helps, because they'll be the same NPCs all the time. Not all the time, but what I'm saying is you can come back to the same NPCs.
It feels weirder to have reoccurring characters following your PC.
Yeah, like if you're like, oh, it took us 4 months to get to Mordor, and we almost died along. Oh, look, and here's my best friend. They made it. How did you get here? Oh,
The goblin.
yeah, and so it's this idea, and that sort of breaks the immersion and breaks sort of the character's connection to the world. But sort of this idea, and it's not, you can run games any way you like. What I'm saying is I think the idea of a home base like gives you NPCs that you can really focus on, and the players can really develop a nice relationship with.
Really good for players who want that social element and that world built beyond seeing the world.
A really good example of the video game sense of it is Skyrim.
Yeah.
Because you have this, like, I don't know, mammoth feat of programming where you literally have NPCs that all look different from each other. Like, you have a few reoccurring voices and faces and things like that, but like, you can literally follow that NPC anywhere it goes on its daily rounds and see what it does in the daily round. You can't really pull that off in a game like this because you'd exhaust the GM.
Yeah.
So it's like trying to create the element of balance. Like, how do you strike that balance of creating a good, believable, immersive world, but man, when they push you, you'll say, guys, I'm not making this up any further.
Yeah. Well, and if you think, so think about it like this too. So if you're doing the 0 to hero campaign, you start at first level, you're going to end up at 20th level, right? You start in your town. Awesome. So you've got a town, you've got your townsfolk, you've got the mayor. Right, okay. Are you part of a larger country or nation or whatever? So you've got people there. So you have NPCs that are still local, but they're on a larger local scale. So you've got, who's the great fighter, over the next town over. So you can have, it's not to say like everyone needs to be town focused, but if you're in one country, the king or queen might be the aspirational, like eventually we'll meet them. But it's still the same NPC, and they can still do things, and they can influence the world. Whereas traveling all across the globe,
Well, that makes it easier.
there's not going to be a lot there. Now, it depends on your genre. If you're playing a spy genre game, modern day, yeah, the femme fatale can show up in the country that you're in,
Sure.
and you'll be like, how did they get here? What?
But you
that's
also have to
what-
keep in mind there is still a home base.
Yeah.
There's your queue and the people who work,
Yeah.
in your
So-
spy org.
So it's just this idea of just think about sort of this idea of the wandering, but also think about like if your players, and especially if you have clients, and if they want to sort of do role playing, give them the opportunity to do it. So one thing I do, and I think we'll talk about this, is I ask players at the start of a game to give me the names of 5 NPCs that are important to their character. And it's just a name, and it's just a little one line. Like, here's my father, they're important here. Here's my best friend, here's a school rival, whatever. And I'll just put those away. But then these are characters, these are things that I know they want to do, things that they want to focus on, and it helps populate my world. If I have 4 players, now I have 20 NPCs. So, and I didn't need to make them, and I can make my own NPCs. So, ask your players to identify 5 to NPCs that are important to them, and use those NPCs. That's what they want. That's not to say you can't make some of your own. Okay, do we all know this urban legend? This one?
Yes, and it's an amazing story. Do you have it?
Oh, I know the urban legend, sure.
Can you please tell us this, because I want to hear it again, because it's amazing.
Well, the GM says, atop the hill you see a gazebo, and they're like, oh, does it see us? Well, it's a gazebo. That's just the players didn't understand what the term gazebo was.
I mean, the whole thing was, we went out and...
Oh, they went out and they did the whole thing, and it's funny, and we can laugh at it, but at the same time, maybe just explain to them, no, a gazebo is, one of those little sort of octagonal round structures, like in a park. And you can have a good laugh, and you can be like, oh, that was funny, cool, let's take a break, blah, 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 because we sort of derail things. But I know GMs that will, relish this and be like, yes, oh, no, it doesn't see you. You can sneak up on it. And they'll just sit there and be like, what are you doing? Why? Aren't we all, playing the same game?
Again, it comes back to the don't be antagonistic.
Yeah. But this
If
idea,
a player doesn't understand what you're talking about and you catch that, explain it to them. It's really important.
So if you play D&D and if I say, oh, da-da-da-da-da, you open the door and there's a giant spider. Now, we're D&D players. What is a giant spider? Give me a size. Use your arms. What do we think? Yeah. But to say to a normal person, someone who's not a gamer, hey, you open the door and there's a giant spider. They're going to be like,
size?
They're going to be like this. And they'll be like, I squash it with my foot.
Yeah.
So it's this idea of expectation. So I use that example because I ran a D&D game for my dad when I was younger. And I was like, there's a giant spider. And he's like, I squash it. And I'm like,
I'm
like, no,
it's big.
That was talked about here was what do you see?
Yeah.
It's what do you like? Because I did that with a player one time. I described a monster. I said, you come in on a massive cyclops, and he goes, oh, cool, yeah, I'm going to go punch it in the face. And I'm like, okay, what do you imagine cyclops is to look like? Because in my head, I'm Greek mythology, this is a giant.
Yeah.
Right, this is 20 feet
He's
tall.
like,
He's that's a guy with one eye. I'm like, and how tall is he? My size? Not what I'm imagining.
Yeah. So, but it's that idea, we can laugh at this and it's a great story, but at the same time, that's bad jamming, in my opinion. Just tell the players,
Don't leave your player hanging. Don't leave them not knowing.
So it's this idea of immersion. The characters live in the world. The burden of immersing them falls to the game master, in my opinion. Players have a lot going on in their lives, we all do, but if you want to be a game master, especially if you're sort of dealing with clients, if you're, whether a teacher, sort of doing it therapeutically, it's our job to sort of immerse them and make them, so when they say they don't understand a gazebo, describe a gazebo. Don't be like, oh, you're doing this thing here. So, player knowledge, I also feel, don't ignore it, lean into it. Again, what color is the dragon? It's white. That's showing that they're engaged with the game.
Can I?
Yeah.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So another thing that I've noticed with my younger players, that is in therapy, they have a really bad sense of scale, most of them.
Yeah.
So I like to have things in the room that I can okay, that's about 6 feet tall, that's about 7 feet. Because I have these young guys who go, oh, I want to be 8 feet tall. I'm like, do you know how tall 8 feet is?
Yeah.
And they're like, not really. I'm like, that means your head is hitting the ceiling and you're standing like this. And they're like, oh, I don't want to be that tall. I'm like, no, you don't want to be that tall.
Well,
You could be 6.5 or 7 feet tall. That's the big door over here. Oh, okay, that's big. I want to look scary, but I don't want to be
yeah. The school I'm at, we have a basketball program, and we have a kid who's 7'3".
Yeah.
And I stand next to him, and I'm like, that dude is huge. I'm a short man. He is gigantic,
Human beings in general have a pretty terrible sense of scale.
Yeah.
Especially though when we're younger, because it's just not.
Yeah.
You grow so fast and change.
How far is a mile?
Oh, there was a story years ago of a guy who got eaten by a bear up in the Alaska wilderness, and someone else killed the bear, and they found the guy inside the bear. The bear was 20 feet tall. 20 feet.
What on earth?
20 feet.
Oh my God.
20 feet scale is you're standing in your second floor bathroom, and there's a bear looking at you. That's 20 feet. And you're like, what the? like, I would, like, cry. I'd be so scared. Like, but when you put it in that scale, you're like, that's 20 feet.
Yeah.
Like,
It's
you're,
shocking,
yeah.
First time I ever fed an elephant, I remember, like, someone talking, you lift your hand up and put the thing on its tongue. I'm like, oh, okay, cool, I lift my hand up, put it on, and then I looked up and I was like, oh. This is the
Yeah.
first time I ever went meat in my life.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So superheroes wasn't a mix. Do we know this guy? Voltron? Voltron? Okay. So your GM, you're playing a Voltron type campaign. The GM's like, oh, long range scanners detect a small fleet of Zartan ships.
No, his name's not Zartan though. Zartan was a G.I. Joe guy. It was.
Whatever. There's so many there's a lot of translations.
It's
of
the
a lot
like
of these.
yeah, it's the 1980s.
It's a lot of translations.
No doubt.
And your players are like, we formed Voltron. Well, that's not the way Voltron works. You have to get beat up a little, right?
So again, it comes down to how does your game
How does your game manage
enable
that?
it?
You can't expect the players to make the choices you want them to make unless the game forces them to make the choices they want to make.
Well,
So-
and in all the Sentai Voltron style shows, the players have to get a little beat up first.
well, that's
right?
when I do game design. That's
Yeah.
what I do. You have to get beat up a little before you can form the Voltron.
Well, and you specifically in Cartoon Action Hour did a Voltron.
yeah, and the whole
style
thing was you had to
character.
get beat up and beat up as a team. So if there's 5 of you, you need to take a total like half of your damage as a team. So one player could take none, one player could get beat up a lot, and then you form the Voltron, and that's how you do it. But it's that idea that encourages the right type of play, where like you've got to go into battle first, and you've got to mix it up, because that's what the genre
You
does.
can tie it into the narrative, which is useful. Like we have another D&D campaign where a player wanted to have like a traumatized
Yeah.
dad type character who used to be a paladin but has given up on it.
Yep.
I said, well, are you allowed to use the paladin mechanics? Well, I guess, but you give up on it. He's like, well, what if once I hit half health, like my panic response kicks in, and I use my
Yeah.
now I love that. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
So he never uses his paladin's powers unless he's at half health.
But see, not just that, he's gonna. We talked about the whole failing in D&D.
Yeah,
Same thing. Like he's gonna go in, he's gonna charge
Make
into
more
battle.
dangerous
He's
choices.
gonna He's going to take
Yeah.
some damage, and then he's going to hulk up. And that's, in
Yeah.
my superhero game, one of the things we do is, like, you can, do things where, like, you need to get beat up a little before you can do stuff. All right. So, White Wolf games, the Bravo is one of the character archetypes. This is how you gain willpower. Willpower is sort of one of the currencies you have in game. And you regain a point of willpower anytime you achieve your agenda through boorishness or intimidation. This need not be physical, as Bravos verbally or socially cow their victims. Well, if we scroll up just a little here, force other kindred out of his way to get what he wants. He's almost certainly an asshole. So I really like this idea that, like, when certain behaviors give you XP, it encourages certain types of things. But if you're just encouraging players to be assholes, well, that guy's going to be an asshole all the time.
It doesn't encourage character growth beyond the basic archetype.
Which again,
You create flat.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, Dr. Ken Jeong, MD, was a doctor, and then he's like, I'm going to be a comedian. So another White Wolf game, Exalted, has these virtues. This is first edition Exalted, and they have conviction, valor, and they have 2 others. In my opinion, this is what this game should be about. So valor is like your sort of bravery. If you have 5 dots of valor, like, Sauron himself could be coming down, and you're like, I'm not scared. But the flip side of that is like some kid comes in and is like, oh, you're not so tough, and you're like, let's challenge, buddy. So there's a downside to being that valorous, and I like that idea that, like, you could do something really cool, but it also means you've got a weakness to go along with it.
Yeah. It
Same
helps.
with conviction. You could put the nation to the sword if you want, but you must fail a conviction check to abandon a cause you've committed yourself to. So this idea that you're like, no, I've said I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to do it, and you can't back down.
Yeah.
That to me is a better implementation of that idea of like a plus and a minus to go along with it.
It helps build that story and again make a more well-rounded sort of character.
It also builds in a unique story point, because
Yeah.
he does fail that conviction role.
Yeah.
Now you've got character growth.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so Star Wars, right? We love the Jedi. They're cool, right? Do you like your episodes 4 through 6 Jedi or episodes 1 through 3 Jedi?
I don't differentiate.
I like the Jedi that do tax reports. Right?
Okay, so Jedi, we imagine them as like warrior poets, right? Well, not really. I mean, Ben, like, literally is in the bar. He takes out his lightsaber. The thing with this is if you give a player a lightsaber, you can't be like, you can only use it when it's cool. they can use it whenever they want. It's theirs. Like, you know, if the rules let them use it, they can use it. So some dude comes up to him in the bar and be like, I take out my lightsaber, cut off his arm. Jesus, Ben, you're the good guy.
Then the stormtroopers show up.
Yeah, they do. But my point is like, you may want something really cool. You may want this rule cool, but once a character's in the player's hands, they can do whatever they want. All right, we all know Lex Luthor, right? So superheroes again, sorry. So Lex Luthor has no superpowers. Superman's like, well, I need to stop this guy, so I'm just going to fly really fast and punch him. Well, you can't. You have a code against killing, so you can't do that. So the Batman's like, I'm going to kill the Joker. Again, same thing. The player gets around it by saying, well, I'll have another character do it because they don't have a code against killing. Superhero games will always have these, you get points for sort of things like a Berserker Rage. What happens when you use that Berserker Rage to make them attack their allies? Berserker Rage isn't just cool when you use it, which if you read comics, happens a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's about, again, we're going to the systems. The systems need to help facilitate.
So, but at disadvantage, whatever game it's in, it's not just about gaining extra points. It should be about those cool moments. So Spider-Man's disadvantage, we all know Spider-Man, right? He won't let people get hurt if he can help it. You know, he has Aunt May. And Spider-Man's best moments are not when he does things to, like, you know, bad guys or whatever. His best moments are when he does things because of his moral conscience. Do you know what I mean? When he sort of saves the day and he makes tough choices.
Or when he fails to save the day.
When he fails to save the day. When he can't. When he's like, I have to do this. So disadvantage, in my opinion, is not, it's a bonus. It's not a bonus, but it should help drive some interesting moments of your character. So I have disadvantages in my game, and it's not about like XP or anything. It's about like, hey, this is a role-playing opportunity for you. A lot of times you're playing in a D&D game, your character dies. What happens? Roll up a new one. Oh, you were playing a Carrick. Well, you need to play another healer. So all of a sudden, so in a D&D game, you've spent 6 months from first level to 8th level, right? Your 8th level character dies, you now roll up a new 8th level character. So 6 months of game time, but all of a sudden there's another 8th level character right here at the tavern where you need him. I'm not a big fan of character death because I believe that players invest in their characters, they want to keep them alive, and you need to figure out other things to do. So I feel that, with this whole thing, and I know a lot of GMs who do this, just make a new character, and you're like, well, that, to me, takes me out of the immersion of the game.
I've seen one GM where, Session Zero, they wanted, players were okay with dying, because he knew this is a hard
it's a grind. Yep, yeah.
And they decided beforehand, you don't get to come back at the same level, and you have to pick a different role.
And that's fine, yeah. And sometimes, but if you're in a dungeon, and your character dies, and oh look, here's another character just happened to be in jail. Here's me. I don't
well, it's like, why would the party suddenly trust this guy?
Yeah. And
I think it's okay to make those exceptions, right? In some games, that's how it works, and that's okay. But
but to me, it creates a disconnect. Yeah.
And that's where the whole party of the tail I say, are we cool with this?
Yeah. So I believe that it could be a trap, this sort of idea of just making a new character. And it's fine. There are games and systems where it works, and we're willing to suspend our disbelief, but if we really want that immersive role-playing experience, I think this is not the way to go. So, this is a player behavior, and can be changed. All right. So raise your hand if you know of a role-playing game that's about your character's past.
What do you mean?
Your backstory.
Oh, no.
But it's not. It's about what's going forward. But a lot of people will, write 100 pages of backstory.
Yeah.
So I'd say stop torturing yourself, man. Live in the now.
What movie was that from? It's driving me nuts.
What movie is this from? Stand and Deliver.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So I used to run a LARP at the college I attended, and they would award points to the most detailed backstories with the most characters they can work from. And I always felt it was a little contradictory because most people's backstories didn't really help with the character in game. Yeah, it's once you get the person in game and feeling it, the character usually changes pretty drastically from how they iterated it.
It takes a great deal of prep and foresight from the GM with the players to make a backstory work well.
Yeah.
I think one of the best ways I saw was when teenagers play it, and they said, here's what your backstory needs to include, don't make it long.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they just said, you need to be in debt for some reason.
Sure.
Why are you in debt? Come up with a story for that. And then that just helped inform the players, and then they became more immersed in the story because they had a reason to be in debt or a reason to be engaged rather than just, we were in a tavern and a bunch of goblins showed up.
Yeah. So most games are about, ostensibly the hero's journey. You start at 0, you move to hero. So the backstory is sort of like just a little dressing there. And it's not to say you can't have a backstory. I would argue, though, that, it's good to have Hemingway, it's good to have an end journey toward, but it's the journey that matters in the end. So your character backstory.
And again, in a lot of games, you're starting at level 0, level 1, so that character is nothing special at the start.
Yeah.
And the journey becoming that really cool character is what happens.
I'd also argue the more specific the details, the less room there is for exploration of those details. And I believe that the exploration of those details can be really fun. And in our game, we do a lot of stuff with I'll do hey, you didn't know this, and we can fly through it. Yeah. Is your game about what happened or what is happening? Passive versus active. Does anyone know this meme? This is some person who's hey, that's my dad in high school with 2 cases of beer on a unicycle. That dad's pretty cool. So I have a bunch of funny things like this. We don't know our parents. We don't know the cool stuff that they did. So our backstory shouldn't have that in there. And this way, that gives the GM a chance to be no, your dad had an affair, and this is your stepbrother or whatever.
And it gives you the chance to find out what your character has that is this unexpected thing.
But also, our memories are fallible.
Yeah.
So, as long as you're not breaking something, it's kind of cool to sort of play with that idea of memory and sort of stuff like that as a GM, if you have to trust your players. All right. Your players will make characters, make sure that you know what they want to be able to do in game. So you're playing a game and someone creates an aquatic-based character. They obviously want something to do with water. So talk to them and find out about that so you can give that to them. Don't be we're not going to play in the water.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't want to play this character. And if they say, I still do, this is what I want to do, that's fine. But sort of make sure that you understand what it is they want to be able to do. And sometimes they don't know the rules as well as you do. I played with a guy who wanted to play a character who was untouchable was his power, his ability. But he wasn't very good at character build, so he couldn't do it. So... and the GM wouldn't help him out. And I'm well, that's just dumb.
Yeah, the GM should help the player accomplish what they want to.
Yeah. Now, in a game, everyone wants to be a star. Encourage your players, cheer for them, empower them. You might even help them with the rules to sort of help them do their things. Open secrets is this idea that a lot of times players will have this cool backstory and they'll have a cool story, so it could be the man with the 6 fingers or whatever. But when you can share those stories with your fellow players, when you can encourage players to share their story, so instead of saying, I get up across the room and I attack that guy, well, that's fine. But if you encourage the player to say, well, why don't you let everyone know why you're doing that? That's called an open secret. So you say, I do it because 10 years ago this man slaughtered my family and blah, blah, blah. Then the rest of the players oh, that's really cool. We're witnessing a cool moment now.
And that helps move beyond that internalized play of cool things are happening in my head, but at the table I just say, I attack.
All right. I used to play with a GM who'd start out every session and be all right, what happened last session? And we would all sort of recap the session, right? And, it's been 2 weeks since we played, and I was feeling a little off, and we'd forget things, and he would just kind of sit there and maliciously, rub his hands together at all the details we forgot. I recap my games and I'll say what happened last session, and my players will tell me, and I'll fill in the gaps of stuff that they missed that's important that they should have remembered.
But it also helps what
was important to them. So when I ask them what happened, they tell me what happened. That lets me know the points that they focused on, what they found interesting. But then I fill in the details of the other stuff that was interesting and important for them to know that I did. I haven't broken the game. I haven't done anything that crazy, but it's a sort of recap idea.
It's like a TV show.
Just like a TV show. Fill in the missing gaps. Players will appreciate your story more. In addition, I also, when we have the end of a story arc, I will share details of what happened, what the NPCs were doing and stuff like this, and the players always be like, that's really cool. And part of that is so that they know then the next time the way my brain works, then they can sort of engage with the story even more.
It's a lot like how some theater groups do sit-downs after their performance to discuss choices that were made, and it can be really helpful and fun to go over things that, we didn't pursue this storyline. Here's how it might have gone.
Does anyone ever run a mystery in game? Sure. How did it go?
Pretty good so far.
Cool. I feel like there's role-playing games out there that are designed to run mysteries, and they have all sorts of rules for how to give characters clues. I believe that a mystery are story beats, that it's not about finding clues, it's about sort of giving the clues to the players at the appropriate time and letting them sort of figure it out, leaving this sort of open idea stuff. Again, I might be the world's greatest detective, my character, me the player, might not be. So you can give me all the clues in the world, but that's the way you're solving it. I may solve it differently. So I tend to think of it as a mystery as the story beat. So you get in a fight at a bar, and when you're on the ground, you pick up a matchbook, and the matchbook has a phone number in it. You didn't make a roll to find that, you're just giving it to them, and then they can do what they want with that mystery. So it's this idea of, I really just feed it. And Ellie's been one of my players, and Ellie really likes mysteries, the other players like mysteries, but I don't make them solve the mysteries. Their characters are the ones solving the mysteries. And we just sort of go along and sort of have the story beats of the mystery, just like when you're watching a mystery movie, and you sort of reveal the stuff, and then at the end it all comes together. And we'll even have debriefs at the end where I'll be like, and then this and this, they'll be like, oh, you son of a bitch. All right. So again, as I said, there are times where at the end of a big story arc, I'll share sort of backstory and stuff, and I'll give all the little details, and my players will tell you there's no red herrings in there's no, everything's important.
Everything matters.
Everything matters.
Something.
And I'll say, just like these movies, we may not have caught all the details, but then they give us the recap, and we're like, oh, that's really cool. And the players appreciate it, and then they appreciate future stories more because they know what to look for. D&D, do you have a favorite edition? No?
Well, I mean, I grew up with second edition, but 5e is where we're working right now. So.
Sure, that's the most popular, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's fine. D&D is a common language. Like if you're running for kids, if you're running out of high school, I can't be like, hey guys, let's play this really obscure indie game. Right. People want to play D&D. It's fine. It's the common language. There are a lot of other games out there. D&D is a great entry. It's a great way to get people involved. If you and the players may decide they might want more, and you can see that through their play. As you play with them, they may realize like, oh, they might want to do something like this. There's lots of other really neat games out there. I personally, believe it or not, I really like 4th edition because I really liked how engaging it was. Like it was sort of like a board game, and that everyone sort of had a cool thing that they could do.
See, I would say it's like a video game. That's
it's a video game.
Play video
I don't play
games,
video
so.
games. Yeah, I'm Gauntlet's fine.
It's interesting how different people sort of are attracted to different aspects.
But 2E, there's a lot of fun in 2E. I had a lot of good times playing 2E. But again, it's a common language. So, a kid's not going to come in and be like, hey, I played this, old school, or, whatever. Like, that's not a common language, but we can all talk about D&D. But D&D can lead to other things.
One of the things I was going to mention, and I'm kind of, all right, so you were saying it's better to choose a system that fits what the players want.
Sure.
Yeah.
Obviously, if they want to go ahead and do something, with Regency era, I don't know, like battalions or whatever, D&D is not probably the system for that.
Yeah.
Likewise, if they want to do some kind of superhero stuff, obviously, again,
D&D not the system. Yeah.
But there are ways to patch or to homebrew.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
Whatever skin coat you need to put on it.
Absolutely.
To make it what you
No, for sure. Yeah, there are things you can do. And I mean, 2nd edition had so many supplements. So they had rules for mass combat. And it worked with the D&D rules, and there were rules for mass combat. You could do your things here. And there are stuff like that. And as long as you're all playing with the same rules, it's fine. You can do whatever you want. And it's not, none of this is to bash D&D. D&D's fine. My issues with D&D, so I've run it out of school, and I can joke about the X card with violence, but I'm not going to run a game where people are killing other people for kids. That weirds me out, So when we're doing stuff, it's undead or rabid animals and stuff like this, just to get them a taste for it, and they like it and they enjoy it, but I'm not going to be like, hey, I want to put you in this moral quandary, and you have to decide what to do, and you're committing murder. Sure. The joke I have with a friend of mine is I'll always be like, but don't worry, D&D's still a game about murder. And he'll be like, shut up. And I'll be like, but it is, at heart.
And it becomes hard in a therapeutic setting, too. That may not be the right choice.
If you're looking to generate empathy, it's really hard to do so if you're
also, it's a system that's hard to grasp I mean, it's easy to grasp, but hard to understand, I guess. You know, it's got a lot of rules and a lot of little moving parts that younger kids may not fully get, or people may not want to buy into for a single one-shot session for therapeutic purposes.
And you can also, you can have one player who really leans into the rules.
Yeah, and others,
and other players who want to show up and buy stuff at the store.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's all, a lot of that though that's all solved in your session 0.
Yeah.
That's all in your intent.
Absolutely.
Of play. So, I mean, you know, if somebody wants if somebody wants to come in and role play and they want to go ahead and I'm just going to go ahead and dump dice because that's all I want to do is just kill things and be a murder hobo. Okay, fine. That's maybe not the session that we're looking to do here, though.
Yeah.
But if you're doing like a one-shot in a library setting, I have another friend who's a librarian who runs D&D at her library, and she runs single sessions for kids. They don't have the advantage of the 0 sessions, so there's, you know, you've got to kind of do that give and take, right?
Yeah.
It's a tough.
Yeah,
tough
like running one shots,
right?
you have to sort of make choices about what you're presenting with stuff. So, you know, so it's this idea like when you know, sorry, I put a quote by the band Rush, which is, if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. I'll choose a path that's clear. I'll choose free will. But then you have another thing that's like nothing can compare to when you roll the dice, and it's where your love for me. But it's this idea of player agency versus the fate via a die roll. So you have a roll, R-O-L-E, versus your roll, R-O-L-L. You know, so how much what do you want it to depend on, your game that you're doing? So let's see here. So we've got, is there a wrong way to role play? You know, dice, no one to roll them. Like, you know, when you're asking someone to roll a die, what's going to happen with that die roll? You know, so that's a big question. And again, I could do 90 minutes on that. But this idea of like, when you're asking someone to roll dice, what are you asking them to do, and for what reason? You know, D&D combats, you're rolling a lot of dice. Is each dice roll significant? No, it is not. You know, is that okay? That's fine. So that's ostensibly it. That's the panel. But it's this, but it's this idea, and we'll go back to those core concepts. I may not be smart, but my character is smart. I may not be charismatic, but my character is. You know, and if your game doesn't really allow for the rules to embrace that, figure out what you're going to do. You know what I mean? Because I should be able to say, well, my character is charismatic. I'm going to, try and do this thing.
Whether it is rules workarounds or finding a new system, there are ways to compromise.
Yeah. So.
Cool.
So that's it. So thank you for staying
so
and chiming in, and I hope you had a good time, and I hope you have a really great rest of save.
Yeah,
so,
hopefully we'll see you at the game room.
Enjoy some games, get some gaming in. I know there's a lot of good stuff going on. I'm running a bunch of games. We're running a bunch of games, so if you're interested in what we do, feel free to find us at the convention center, because we'll be there.
Thank
you so
you.
much.